Hello everyone, we finally made it. This is it. This is the end of the semester. It's been a great one. I want to thank all of my classmates and Dr. McCrocklin. Certainly has been an insightful subject matter this semester. And this is my product and program evaluation plan. This is my first experience in building an actual curriculum. I've taught for 4 years and I've had the inside perspective of how a classroom functions and how everything works, but I've never had that holistic experience in building and designing a whole curriculum. So this was pretty cool. First up, we have the needs analysis. With my needs analysis, I looked at a lot of different levels of triangulation. And primarily, I looked at the scores from the English 1 EOCs. And the English 1 EOC is the test that our students have right before us. This course was designed for the English 2 EOC, specifically for ESL students. So this data that I received from their previous year scores was very insightful. I got to see how strong they were with their writing, how strong they were in the specific TEKS outlined by the state of Texas, and TEKS stands for Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. And those basically define the course that we're working with here. I also looked at something that my class got to implement throughout the semester, and that was benchmarking. The specific benchmark that I looked at in consulting data for my needs analysis was our English 2 EOC winter benchmark. And this benchmark was pretty much an entire EOC test. It was a release test from last year, which was 2016, and it was a really great simulation of what they'd be expecting on their test in March. I also consulted the TELPUS language proficiency levels from the TELPUS test, and those proficiency levels are beginning, intermediate, advanced, and advanced high in the domains of reading, writing, speaking, and listening. This is a very important test for my students in particular because it's all around the ESL program. For this program, students are monitored on these levels by their teachers throughout the entire year, and basically we monitor their progress. I was able to acquire their data from the previous year as well as their entire years of being enrolled in school in the United States. So this is really cool because I got to track how much progress that they've made in all these specific levels. For my course in particular, I really found a lot of data on writing and speaking and reading. Those seem to be the biggest areas of need of improvement. Listening was pretty solid, but reading, writing, and speaking were the main ones, with a lot of emphasis on reading and writing. Other sources of data that I consulted for completing the needs analysis was student population information, and this is basically who my population is, how many students were labeled ESL, how many students were labeled at risk, how many students make it to school on a daily basis. This was given access by our program at school, our data management system called eSchool Plus. I also conducted classroom observations from similar courses from my peers. Conducted student surveys for some key students that I focused in on. And I also conducted interviews with administration and as well as potential employers from around the area. On the right side, we've got a screenshot of that eSchool Plus homepage, and that gives me so much data on how students are doing in the actual course and who my students are. And the next graphic here is a screenshot of the Tango Trends homepage. This is where I get all of my data from EOC scores, benchmark scores, even assignments. We can post different assignments on there and track students' progress throughout the year. So this was a great source to use, very enlightening, and I learned quite a bit about the program myself in going through this needs analysis process. So these were the major aspects that I consulted in the needs analysis itself, and the major findings that were brought to life here. From the student data, I noticed that students averaged a score of 3450 on the English 1 EOC. Passing score for English 1, we're looking at about 3750. So these students are fairly close. but they're still not there. A 3750 on the test equates to about 60%. So this is roughly about a 50% on the test. The highest score that I received from my students in their English 1 EOC was a 3900. The lowest score that I received was a 2125. And overall, this averaged out to about a 25% passing rate for my students for English 1 EOC. From the English 2 winter benchmark, the data that I had access to and I was consulting, there was a large increase in terms of passing rate. The average score was a 45%, and 80% was the highest score. The average writing score was a 2, but most importantly here, the overall passing rate increased by 15% to 40%. Now, of course, this isn't groundbreaking, this isn't amazing, but it is definitely progress. And it was something to really be analyzed, and that's something that I spent a lot of time with the data looking at. What was being done in the course? What was being done in the courses my peers taught? What was being done in the student observations that could give credence to this increase in data? Other major findings that I looked at on the TELPUS test was that students overall increased a level from last year. A lot of these students were ranked at intermediate. That's the second level in the TELPUS proficiency levels. So students pretty much bumped up an entire level to advanced. And most of these students involved in the course increased their scores to advanced high in the domain of listening. The majority were in advanced in reading, speaking, and writing. The speaking and writing domains increased from intermediate to advanced. So again, not too much in terms of, wow, these students have completely mastered the English language, or wow, they're doing so incredible that they understand every word of English, but it does show progress. So I felt that was very important to look at. And again, paying attention to what was being done in the course. How are students interacting? How is the teacher interacting with the students? And what did the students feel was effective themselves? And through all this important data, I was able to develop some cool theories and overall have some great input to design the actual syllabus and course sequencing. Now, the interviews, some major findings from there. Through my conversation with the Dean of Instruction, she felt that obviously the immediate goal is to help students develop their English speaking skills, to develop their English comprehension skills, their English writing and reading skills. This is directly tied into the TELPUS exam. However, a major push for her is finding a way to boost EOC scores as well. And the reason for this is because our campus and all campuses in Texas are measured by certain standards. For our English 2 test, we have to additionally meet something called progress measures. And this is where a student will show progress from English 1 to English 2 by increasing their scores. So based on the data that's already been collected, there is evidence to show that what's been happening in the course and how the course has been set up is having some success in meeting that progress measure goals. Now, the Dean of Instruction also wants to raise scores holistically, not just in the ESL classrooms, but campus-wide. So the EOC was a major factor. I know we're not supposed to pay so much attention to one primary stakeholder there, but the test pretty much did dictate the layout of the course. One thing that I absolutely did find throughout this study and all of my research and putting this together was that even though the test is such a dominant factor, the most important factor is absolutely the students. If they don't understand what's going on, if they don't understand the content, then there's absolutely no point in teaching it whatsoever. So that was the challenge here, finding a way to take this dominant influencer that is taught in English, that is tested in English, and find a way to adapt it to ESL students' linguistic abilities. Most of these students in this course particularly have spent about 2 years in the United States. The actual age range was 2 to 5 years in English courses. So this is a big challenge, and it's something that I'm really proud of, in particular in my course sequencing, which we'll talk about later. And speaking of adapting to ESL students, we have our LPAC chair. This person's very important because she is a big factor in helping out with the school's local ESL program. And with that in mind, her primary goal is students exiting the ESL program. She felt that this is very important because by doing so, they'll be able to graduate with the distinction of being bilingual. And obviously, they'll be able to develop those key communicative skills and distinguish themselves as diverse, marketable people that can speak 2 languages fluently. This teacher is also a part of the English 2 team, so obviously passing the English 2 EOC is a major factor as well. And without passing this test, unfortunately, our students are unable to graduate. So this test becomes even more important there as well. And it's just a constant reminder of that dominant influencer there. The last of my interviews was with employers. I consulted some local employers and around the area because students in this course are already 16, 17 years old. And some of them might be looking for jobs. Some of them already have jobs to help support their families and to be there for them. So employers that I talked to, one case in particular was Raising Cane's restaurant. It's a few blocks from our campus, and from there, the boss that I spoke to really valued bilingual communication because it's so prevalent in the area, and being able to masterfully switch from one language to the other, from customer to need, absolutely critical. Other aspects that I found in interviews and in job listings was the ability to think critically. And this is something that's very important with the EOC and with the course because so much of it deals with making inferences. That was actually one TEK that I found very low in terms of my student data. So that making inferences and evaluating content throughout different genres was something that I try to emphasize in my course sequencing, and something that I feel will help develop into an actual skill that they can take into various employers. And of course that ties into my last point on there, communicate effectively. Well, just like bilingual communication, they need to have clear communication with whatever language that they speak. And this also ties into a similar TEK in writing an essay, being able to develop their position and being able to support that position with relevant facts and details. For this EOC test, the testing genre is the persuasive essay. So in terms of communicating effectively and how to build that up towards future possible employers, a large emphasis on the persuasive essay as a TEK and as a communicative skill was placed in the course sequencing and the overall design of the course. Now, of course, the current sequencing, and an advantage tying back to that previous point for the persuasive essay, the actual EOC rubric and the actual existing curriculum does have a preference for expression of ideas over grammatical correctness in writing. This is a huge, huge factor because these students that are just learning the language, having them know that it's not necessarily about every single comma or every single period or every single word being spelled correctly, but rather the development of an idea and with those relevant details. Having that priority in mind can really motivate a student to try and to build the skill rather than being concentrated on minute little details. Additionally, sources requested that the students be skilled enough to develop a strong composition in which they can defend an argument. And through this point, this is the persuasive essay that I just mentioned. The EOC measures the ability of the students to master the TEKS. The TELPUS examines their ability to read, write, speak, and listen in English, and overall English ability. And the local curriculum for English 2 has the course goal of answering the question, why is it important to study and write literature? So all of these sources of data really help to consult me on what to build going forward for my specialized ESL English 2 course. Let's move on to creating the curriculum. So based on all of these different sources that I obtained in my needs analysis, what I wanted to establish in the curriculum was targeting the writing scores, like mentioned a few moments ago. Unfortunately, there were a lot of weak writing scores according to the EOC rubric scaled 1 through 4, 1 being an essay that definitely needs to improve. It's a developing essay, and a 4 that is an accomplished essay at developing a position and supporting it with relevant details. So my analysis suggested that students in this course need more guided activities in targeting writing. And I looked at shared activities in which students who are stronger in writing can be paired with a partner that is close to a passing standard in writing but is still weaker than that student. And in a sense, they create this cohesion and this collaborative effort in which they help each other build their skills. Additionally, the increase in the average TELPUS proficiency level from intermediate to advanced can also be suggested by the implementation of daily fluency activities. One thing that was happening in all of these courses, those that I observed and those that I was actually a part of, was daily fluency reading. And this is where students are paired collaboratively with a partner. They are assigned a story. The teacher reads through the story, models the story so they can listen and understand how it's supposed to be spoken. They ask questions, they ask for different meanings and kind of clarify any information that's misunderstood. And then they go ahead and pair up with a partner, and they are timed in their readings for 1 minute. So they time each other, they average, they calculate and they average out how many correct words per minute they were able to accomplish in that time frame. So this was done weekly in the courses observed and a part of, and I felt this was an absolutely critical part to the success that was already showcased from the course so far, and something that I wanted to build into this curriculum. Additionally, through student interviews, just major points of emphasis was a need for a patient instructor. I think so often we can get caught up in these test scores or all of these other external stakeholders, but like I mentioned, if we lose sight of who's most important, and that is the student, then there's no point in moving forward with anything. If the student's not understanding, if the student's not gaining anything from the course, then the course absolutely has no merit. So a patient instructor, that was groundbreaking for me to see those kind of responses in the student surveys. And it's very humbling because you see and you think about and you reflect as an instructor, what can I do to be patient, and what can I do to accommodate and help a student rather than just moving so quickly throughout the system. So in my curriculum, I sequenced it so it is through a pace. It's not as fast as the existing curriculum, which pretty much mandates 2-3 stories per week. This new curriculum that I created focuses on no more than 1 key story per week, but ends up scaffolding these stories so the skills and the content layer all together. So I felt that that was a way that I could address that to instructors of this course, and also emphasizing that just being able to adapt to different learning styles and adapt the pace. It ties back to the teachability concept that we learned very early on in this course. If the course isn't teachable, it's not workable. Same for the learners. If the students cannot learn it, then it has no merit whatsoever. This led me also into the learning principles for the course. The learning principles that I focused on for this one were the space retrieval, the learning burden, and the learning burden for me was a huge one because I could tie the content and the concepts into the students' existing language and existing literacy. The strategies and autonomy, another big component, and this ties into the EOC, but also in creating an equitable environment for the students and giving them access to some different tricks and methods, breaking down information so that they are closer in terms of academic understanding and academic literacy to somebody who is a native English speaker and who has been in the United States for their entire life. I also looked at frequency, fluency, motivation, that's a big one with a patient instructor, the ongoing needs and environmental analysis, just always being aware of what's happening in your environment and within your system and being willing to make those adjustments. So my curriculum is very flexible. And feedback. Feedback to me, a very critical one. Engaging students in that verbal and written form of feedback through essay conferences, through peer reviews, that was something that was happening in my observations that I made of this course, and it was great to see the student engagement with each other and with the instructors, and that is absolutely something that was very valuable to bring into this curriculum. So some highlights from the curriculum that I've designed. Some of these key SLOs that I wanted to emphasize here. By the end of the semester, students will be able to develop a thesis statement and elaborate on that statement using relevant examples and details. So again, this is about the 4th time that I've mentioned having that position and being able to support it. That's a big key that absolutely affects all of the stakeholders involved. So this was one of the first ones that I focused on and one of the first ones that I wanted to emphasize here. By the date of the English 2 EOC, the students will be able to construct a fully organized, persuasive essay that defends their position statement and convinces the reader with at least a score of a 2 within the EOC writing rubric. So this again ties into boosting the writing scores for students within this EOC rubric. And it focuses on the tested genre, the persuasive essay. Our next one ties in the literacy component with the actual composition. By the date of the English 2 EOC, the students will be able to summarize literary and nonfiction texts, formulate answers, and solve multiple choice questions at a 60% accuracy using the read a little, write a little EOC multiple choice strategies. So this targets in the strategies and autonomy, and the strategy here is read a little, write a little, and this is something that my English team got to go to earlier in the school year. And basically this strategy chunks information down to a few different components. So let's say you have a story that's 3 pages long on the EOC, which is a typical length. What students can do is chunk that 3 pages of content into several mini paragraphs, and on the side of those paragraphs they write notes. So by the end of reading the story, they'll have chunked the entire story and annotated different notes on there to create a full summary that's brief to them and short and comprehensible, but also allows them to interact with that multiple choice section as they refer back and forth, not by necessarily having to go through every single detail on the written text again, but by consulting their notes. So this was a strategy that I felt was very valuable. Based on my observations and my experience, I absolutely worked it into this curriculum. And again, it ties in the 60% accuracy because that's pretty much what all those numbers equate to. We're looking at about a 60% passing percentage in order to pass this test. So I had to make sure I tied in that 60% aspect in there. The next one, by the date of the TELPS exam evaluation of English proficiency levels, students will be able to elaborate in English their communication through written and verbal exchanges in order to demonstrate an advanced or an advanced high level of proficiency. So again, this couples with boosting those TELPS scores, taking them from beginner or intermediate to the advanced level. If they're at the intermediate or advanced level already, it's taking them to that next level in advanced high. So this is a big one for the TELPS examination, but this is huge just for overall comprehension of the language and interaction and communication. And my last key one here that I wanted to just relay with all of you, by the end of the semester, students will be able to interpret, make inferences, and analyze a text using graphic organizers, chunking information, and comparing and contrasting characters, themes, and tones. I like this one because it incorporated several of the TEKs that students were weak on based on student data, and that's making inferences, understanding differences between characters and genres, understanding thematic elements, and being able to infer and explain tone. So I tied in different strategies with this one, and as I mentioned, being able to make those inferences and all these different skills tie into more than just the test, but an actual and giving them actual skills to develop for future jobs, and of course their other classes as well. On the next slide here for curriculum highlights, I have a strand that I'm very proud of in particular, and the topic for the entire week there is making comparisons across different genres. So leading up to this week, students have read the excerpt from Kaffir Boy, which is an autobiography by Mark Mathebane, and it takes place during the time of apartheid. And so students have already discussed that story. They've written a persuasive essay correlating to it. They've done different activities, and they've transitioned to another short story, which is called Contents of a Dead Man's Pocket by Jack Finney. And in this story, this takes place in 1920s New York City, and it's about a man who values work over his family. So he comes to the realization that, of course, family is more important. And that ties into Kaffir Boy because Kaffir Boy, Mark Mathebane, listens to his mother, follows his mother's advice, and decides to go to school instead of joining a gang. I felt that these two texts do loosely compare to each other, but I wanted to make a comparison across a completely different sort of literacy genre, movies. So this week we view the film McCrocklin, USA, which for these students enrolled in this course, based on student demographics, of course, most students were revealed to have a primary language of speaking Spanish. And all of you in the Valley, of course, are pretty familiar with this. My school is actually just minutes away from the border. Brownsville itself is right there on the border. So having this curriculum for Brownsville and the schools in that system, most of the students are of a Spanish background from Mexico. So this story deals with students that are immigrants, students that are of Mexican heritage, and being able to break those barriers and make something of their life. So in all three of these stories, the protagonists are able to come to some sort of enlightenment, to some sort of realization. And through this week, we'll have those sort of discussions. We'll conduct an analysis and collaborative discussion of the tones, the moods, the foreshadowing within this actual movie while viewing it, and then comparing it to the different stories using a Venn diagram to compare and contrast the thematic elements, to compare the characters, to compare the situations, the themes, the settings. Through this, the week as well, we'll also use the there, not there multiple choice strategy This is just another strategy that will allow them access to kind of comprehend the stories a little bit more. And in this story, they look at the questions of the multiple choice. They break those down with important keywords and components. They look at the multiple choice actual answers and try to make inferences on what seems logical and what doesn't, based on tone, based on how the answer choices respond to the question, and based on the information that they already know about the story. So it kind of simplifies the questions and the answers to make their reasoning in picking their multiple choice answers easier and clearer. This week as well, I also target paired reading fluency, as in all the weeks that I've identified in this course sequencing. On the side there as well, I've got journal entry 7. So one interesting thing that I'm doing for this course based on data that I've gathered is helping students develop an awareness of how reading and writing are related and what relationship that they have. And moreover, how those bleed into a student's writing identity and how a student understands what is being written. So throughout the semester, students have a journal assignment in which they pick a reading text of any genre for a given week, and they write about that text. They give me a few details. They're provided with some guided questions, such as what is the author's purpose, what is the tone, different tics that we're focused on throughout the semester are reflected in here. But not only that, students are analyzing the rhetorical ability of the author to relay their message. They're analyzing how the actual text impacted themselves. And so throughout the semester, they are preparing this journal. So at the very end of the first semester, they're going to have an entire listing of different sources, reading sources, which can include short stories, magazines, heck, even YouTube posts, movies, and different texts that the instructor will recommend through conferences throughout the semester. So at the end of the semester, they'll have this whole index of different texts and how they've understood these texts, and they'll get to see their progress as a reader throughout the semester, and ultimately understand how these compositions and these genres have affected them as a writer to create their writing identity. So that's their journal entries that they'll be conducting throughout the semester, and it serves as pretty much a giant PBL, a project-based learning experience, in which they learn more about reading, they learn more about writing, they practice their TELPUS domains, they practice their tics, and ultimately they prepare themselves to add more of a literacy index. This week I do focus on a multiple choice exam and a comparative analysis between these three stories: Kaffir Boy, Contents of a Dead Man's Pocket, and McCrocklin, USA. That is a major grade for our grading period, and our grading period for this curriculum is set up for 6 weeks grading periods. Another key strand that I'm very proud of is featured in week 14, and that topic is figurative language. For figurative language to practice this, beforehand, students have already been introduced to different terms such as similes, metaphors, hyperboles, onomatopoeia, personification. So they're already familiar with these terms, but now they're going to apply these terms to an actual story. So Terrible Things by Eve Bunting is an allegory of the Holocaust, and the whole story is a symbol for what actually happened. Rather than using Nazis and Jewish people, this story uses forest animals, and essentially the terrible things come in and they take the forest animals one by one. It's based off of Eve Bunting's experience and some of the interviews that she had with Holocaust survivors about how a major issue in the Holocaust was that people just didn't speak up for each other. So this story is about the animals being taken one by these terrible things, and the animals not doing anything for each other, and eventually they're all just taken, except for the one animal that said, hey guys, we should help each other out. So students are analyzing this content and understanding what the historical context is while applying these figurative language terms and practicing the different terms that we've gone through the semester. The activities that are listed to the next column, beginning with quick write here, basically I begin the lesson, the strand, by introducing them to the Holocaust and what it is, and through this quick write entry where they respond to injustice, where they respond to, is it right to take advantage of others just because they're different? Is it right to make those different distinguishers in the first place? So I've created a quick write. All these materials are listed in the actual document that was produced for Dr. McCrocklin. They've got this quick write. They reflect on it. They write on it, then they think, pair, share with a buddy. They share their thoughts, and that transitions into viewing a background documentary on the Holocaust. The actual story will consist of the read a little, write a little strategy practice, where they chunk and they annotate the information. They move on then to multiple choice practice for this story. And one cool thing that I got feedback on in our initial posting of this assignment was being able to create a language poster. This would be based off of figurative language terms that were practiced, and basically students are assigned a different term and they have to find that term within the story. Once they find that term, they develop a figurative language poster that uses the definition of the word, a quote of the word from the actual story, and they have to do their best to draw a picture of that story representing the term. Once they do that, they present these posters to their peers. They practice their language speaking abilities and as well as the specific TEKs. I've also integrated a persuasive essay into this assignment. Collaboratively design the persuasive essay in small groups. So once again, based off of my data from my needs analysis, I saw a lot of collaboration in creating persuasive essays, and this was a big point of emphasis. Most of the essays in this course sequencing are done collaboratively. This one in particular, what they do, each student in their pairs is responsible for 2 paragraphs. They share their information, they do the pre-writing together, and they built this truly collaboratively. They help each other out. And then once their essay is complete, we move on to a group essay peer edit, which is again collaborative. Pairs team up with each other to make a group of 4, and they exchange essays, they read it together, they share verbal feedback, they write down feedback as well. So once again, they're practicing all of those different domains. As well as the actual writing process. They peer edit, they then produce a final product as well. The last activity for this week, once again, is paired reading fluency. We never stray away from that. And on the next column, they have an additional journal entry. They are responsible for 1 entry at least per week. So this would already be the 13th one for the semester. They have a multiple choice practice, which is the one on terrible things, and they collaboratively develop a persuasive essay. And the essay that I've designed for this one ties in once again to the experiences of the protagonist in the story. All of the essays that I've designed that are featured in a week that have a story tie into a thematic element or the conflict that the protagonist has experienced. So this one in particular says, write an essay stating your position, whether one person can make a difference. And this links to the terrible things because the protagonist tries to help others against large obstacles. Unfortunately, no one listens to him. So they are exposed to the yes on that one because we can see that the protagonist survived the attack by the terrible things. He is able to possibly go to different forests and warn them, And we also see the no because no one listened to him, and all the animals were taken one by one, except for this one caring rabbit. Now, of course, this is just a basis point, but from their experiences through the semester in writing, they should be able to have that ability to refer to different details and to refer to different experiences to help augment their persuasive essays. Additional curriculum highlights, just referring back to that previous strand, I really like those strands a lot. Those are the key ones for me. The terrible things one in particular effectively targets the goals of the course while providing students ample opportunities to participate content and concepts taught throughout the semester. It provides familiar formatting and scaffolds in strategies learned in prior lessons. Additionally, the driving force for the content and sequencing goals was from the TEKS and the EOC, as mentioned. Collaborative essays were supported by the concepts of shared activities, where each learner provides something within the informational gaps, such as these two students. And what I mean by that is that based on my needs analysis from an observation, I had two students that absolutely helped each other so much. One student was a great writer, very strong. She was advanced high in all of her levels. And the person she was paired up with was kind of in between the intermediate and advanced level. And he had a very difficult time in developing a position statement and developing relevant details around that. But by pairing them together, the girl that was the stronger writer was able to kind of teach that skill to him on how to center your idea, how to develop your thesis. And moreover, they were able to bounce ideas to each other about how to support that detail, how to support that thesis with details. So they both taught themselves something there, and they both added something to the conversation and to the actual essay that was created. They negotiated information, built a shared vocabulary, and engaged in meaning, focus, input, and output, while also demonstrating a communicative approach of assessment and comprehension. The fluency activities were used with high frequency. They were built in the content and sequencing through the paired reading fluency. The writing identity journal, like I mentioned right now, was threaded throughout the semester, and it gave students a chance to figure out what relationship they had to reading and writing, and to investigate how writing affects reading and how reading affects writing. Overall, lessons learned, awareness of the stakeholders' needs through the goals of the course guided me in this process. There's so many stakeholders, so many different people that have value in this course, and that was so enlightening to me. As a teacher, sometimes you just see your immediate environment and you don't consider what else is being affected, and how these skills that you teach do have a very large impact on what students do moving forward with their lives. So the awareness of the stakeholders, with students being the #1 priority, with the EOC, stakeholders, and with the administrators, with the teachers, of course, making this course teachable in the first place. I tried very hard to balance all of those. I centered on goals and factored how stakeholders would be affected. Once again, the most important stakeholder is the student. The longest for me to create in this project, hands down, was the course sequencing. I turned in a draft, I went back to it, I revised it, and I beefed it up. It took me quite a few hours to put this all together based on my notes and my experience. It's something that I'm very, very proud of. I feel like this course sequencing is something that I can take to my classroom next year and to my my English 2 team and say, this is what we can build off on. Let's make this better, and let's actually implement it. Content must be adjusted to the student's ability. If a student is unable to comprehend the content, even the most detailed curriculum will fail. Through all of this, it just felt like I was trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle. very complicating, very time consuming, but when you get that end product and you see that result fleshed out and how every part connects to each other and it builds this cohesive unit, it's just so gratifying, and I can't wait to actually try to implement this going forward. Now, how to evaluate this? The evaluation plan and the amount of quality of learning. This is the document that is attached to the presentation. This is what we've been working on for the past week. And basically, the immediate feedback of quality of learning will be assessed by scores. This is how we'll know these activities actually worked. Did we see progress in scores? Did we see the increase in the mastery of the EOC? Did we see students progress through their proficiency levels in the TELPUS? Another aspect that I'd really like to implement, and it's something that I noticed through my observations, was something called instructional round peer observation. Basically, this is a guided observation session in which teachers get to see how other teachers are approaching the same content, and they provide feedback to each other. So teachers go into each other's classrooms, they see how the lesson is being performed, what approach and what additional activities the teacher may be adding to that, and then they have a post-conference afterwards in which they discuss what happened and what key takeaways were. And the goal of this is not to be judgmental or critical, but just to be able to see what worked and give advice to what could be made better. So this is something that I want to add into the actual evaluation for this program. And one that I'm working on quite a bit is Kenneth Burke's Pentad. Now, basically, the Pentad is organized through some different components, and it's understanding the relationship between an agent, a person, and their rhetorical force. So in this instance, the agent, we've got so many of them, those are the different stakeholders, with priority, of course, on the student and on the teachers. And the rhetorical force is the curriculum. So this Pentad, what I would do to collect all these different components is look at the data throughout the semester, look at the surveys, look at the different information that has been gathered, and assemble it all in Kenneth Burke's Pentad ratioization process. So essentially, this calls for the different components of the Pentad: scene, act, agent, agency, purpose, to be compared with each other. Although I also wanted to add in another component, and that was attitude. And Kenneth Burke has spoke quite frequently on not including this one as being a regret that he's had. He felt that attitude is a very important component because we get to understand how a person feels about that rhetorical force as well. So in this instance, we'll be able to understand how a teacher feels about teaching this course, how a student feels about taking this course. The scene would be the actual course environment that it's taught in. The act is the course itself. The agent are the different stakeholders involved. And the agency, how is this being conducted? So we can look at the different learning principles for that. So all of these different factors are paired together in different ratios, and what needs to happen here is that the researcher analyzes which component is the most dominant influencer. So you pair up the ratios and you compare, for example, scene to act. Did the environment have more influence on the actual curriculum, or did the curriculum have more influence on the scene? So for each pairs of these, you answer yes or no, and then based on the number of yeses that you have, those are going to be the dominant influencers here. So through this, we'll understand what is influencing what more. Is it the agents? Is it the act? Is it the agency? Is it the actual mentality, the attitude? Is it the purpose, why this whole thing is being done, which would be the learning goals? So this aspect is something that I'm working with quite a bit on my thesis. And when we were talking about evaluation last week, this is one of the first things that came to my mind, just being able to understand how all of these components in building a curriculum and how successful a curriculum would be work, and how they're interconnected and how they influence each other. Evaluation plan, teacher and learner satisfaction. I mentioned surveys just a little while ago to talk about the attitude portion. Well, attitude would be conducted by making a lot of regular observations of student-teacher interactions. It would also be done by conducting a survey at the beginning of the semester, and I've got a snapshot of that survey on the screen here. This survey is one that would be given at the beginning, and it kind of monitors their attitude and their interpretation of what it is to speak English and how they feel about speaking, reading, and writing. So I'm tying in the TELPUS domains as well as some of the other TEKs in here as well. So this pre-survey is done at the beginning of the course, and it's used to compare progress throughout the year to and the actual attitudes and how they change throughout the year as well. Smaller surveys are used to evaluate assignments, and here is a screenshot of that. And through this, I've incorporated a Likert scale here: strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree for my questions. An example of the question: I understood the material on the assignment. So if they mastered the TEK and they understood everything, they're more likely going to put agree or strongly disagree. If they had trouble with the formatting, if they had trouble with the actual information, they'd be on disagree or strongly disagree. So this provides instantaneous feedback for the instructor to realize that, you know what, before moving on to the next content objective, I need to go back and I need to focus on this one, or I need to reteach this. And that ties in the need for the patient instructor and not going too fast. The last form of survey for students is a post-semester survey, and that looks very similar to the pre-survey that I just mentioned. The last survey on here is the post-semester teacher survey, and this will be done at the end of the semester for the teacher. We want to know, what was it like for a teacher to go through this process and actually teach the course. So an example of this would be question number 1, on a scale between 1 through 5, with 1 being not very difficult and 5 being very difficult, rate the difficulty of implementing the curriculum this semester. So through this process, teachers are able to provide their honest feedback and help the curriculum designers understand what needs to be adapted and adjusted going forward. Additionally, the evaluation can be measured from the course graduates and their success and throughout their progress in high school. So for the actual TELPUS test, we can measure the advancement of students through the TELPUS proficiency domains throughout high school in terms of their beginning, intermediate, advanced, and advanced high levels, and whether or not they're able to exit the course as well. We can monitor their grade point averages in English courses and see if they are increasing throughout their high school career. Track actual graduation rates as an indicator of success, and the number of students enrolled in post-secondary education. Now, by post-secondary education, I don't just mean college, but vocational schools, different aspects like that. And I felt this was important because through the needs analysis and the student surveys, there were quite a number of students that mentioned they wanted to use English to help them get a career at some point. So this was a huge learning experience. I thank you guys for staying with me through this presentation. I know, very lengthy. I don't know how many of you made it through, but I thank you so much for it. It's been a great experience, guys, and I appreciate learning from each and every one of you that provided me feedback, and for each and every one of you that I was able to provide feedback to. It was a great two-way process there. I wish you all the best of luck, and it's been a great semester. Thank you so much.